Hello, my name is Chris and I've been a teacher of business and economics for the past 27 years. Today we're going to look at aggregate supply. Just move my slides on. So our learning objectives today are to understand what aggregate supply is, to understand what the classical short-run aggregate supply curve looks like, to understand what the classical long-run aggregate supply curve looks like, and to understand a different point of view, what the Keynesian aggregate supply curve looks like. So first of all, what is aggregate supply? Well, aggregate supply is all the supply in the economy added up together to create one aggregate supply curve. So we can see in this slide that we've got different supply curves that you would have seen in microeconomics. And this is the supply curve for all the products that are produced within the economy, from, as it says there, cakes, steel, sofas, tarmac, clothes. Every product and service that you can list, their supply curves are all added up together and produce one supply curve which covers the whole economy. You'll notice that price level is measured on the left axis, and on the bottom axis, national output, and we could also put on there national income. So that is the aggregate supply curve. All the supply curves added together across the economy to give one aggregate supply curve. And as you can see, it is sloping upwards. In other words, as price levels increase, supply will increase as more producers get in on supplying goods and services at those higher prices, as you would have expected in a microeconomic situation. So, as we've discussed, we've got price level on the left, national output at the bottom, and our short-run aggregate supply curve. Remember to label these properly. Label the short-run aggregate supply curve at the top of the curve. So to increase supply within economy, firms will have to use their existing inputs more intensively. So what we're seeing on this curve is they don't have time in the short run to increase machinery or factories, because that takes time. Whereas what they can do is ask their current workers to work longer hours, or recruit people quite quickly to come and work for them to increase output. So the short run does not allow time for increasing the amount of machinery or factories available. It is just going to be those things that they can affect in the short run, and the major one on that front is workers and the hours that workers work. This will of course increase their costs, and that's why the price level is going to go up because for workers to work longer hours, you will have to pay them overtime, and so that will increase cost per unit. So just like we would have seen in the micro supply curve, we'll get a shift in our supply curves. Shifts to the right, where supply is increasing at the same price level. Now, this could be caused by a decrease in wage costs, a decrease in raw material costs, or a decrease in corporation tax. Apologies for the typo there. So we can see that would shift our curve to the right as we can produce more goods at the same price within the economy. Shift to the left, well, just the opposite. An increase in wage costs means we can't produce as much at the same price. An increase in raw material costs, such as we're seeing at the moment, the cost of energy is causing supply to shift to the left. and an increase in corporation tax. So those shifts, you can see the curves are moving parallel to the original SRAS curve. So SRAS 1 is parallel there, and again parallel to SRAS 2. So shifts in the supply curve. So in the long run, obviously we can change things a little bit. But as we can see with our production possibility curve here, there is a limit to how far we can move things. So in the short run, we are probably here somewhere, or perhaps even closer to the curve here. But generally in an economy, there is going to be some unemployment, some capacity that's not utilized, some inefficiencies. And so in the short run, we probably are below the optimum point on the production possibility curve. In the long run, we want to move closer to that production possibility curve. So along that line somewhere, if we actually hit that curve, say there, we cannot get past that point without some kind of efficiency gains, changes in technologies, change in productivity. So our long run classical AS curve is vertical. That means all our offices, all our factories, all our machinery, all our workers are maxed out. They are working as hard as they possibly can and as efficiently as they can. We've got no unemployment at that point. There is no one left to recruit into the business to increase productivity or increase production. And so the long run AS curve is vertical. That means we cannot produce any more than that. So let me just move this on and just rub those out. So shifts in the long run aggregate supply curve, well, the shifts can be caused by changes in productivity. So if we find new production techniques, we can shift that long run aggregate supply curve out to the right, perhaps new technology, any changes in energy prices, as mentioned in short run as well, changes in raw material prices, changes in legislation. So for instance, at the moment, the government have launched new free ports where there are less restrictions and less tax, and so production will shift outwards to the right. Changes to infrastructure, so things like roads, rail. If you improve that infrastructure, even broadband, if you improve that infrastructure, you can potentially increase long-run aggregate supply. Obviously, if we have changes to detriment, so for instance, new legislation like we've seen with leaving the EU, where our exports have to have new documentation, we might see a shift to the left. Changes in education take a long time to come through, but if we have a better educated nation, then the potential is that we can shift our long-run aggregate supply curve out to the right. Now, the economist Keynes criticised the classical view. He believed that the economy did not always operate at full capacity, and wages are sticky. They don't just instantly adjust to full employment. There is a bit of time between full employment and wages rising. So we can see here our diagram. We got price level and national output again on the bottom. And we have this kind of flat line area here where we have spare capacity. In this area here, we have people that are unemployed. We also have machinery that perhaps isn't fully used, and therefore we can shift along that curve quite easily without affecting price level. As we approach this point here, we are approaching a full employment. Sorry, I'll just better X there. and we're approaching full employment. And so that is when we actually, full employment and full capacity. So it's when we reach that kind of vertical line that we saw in the classical view on the Keynesian view. So that's the limit as we're reaching the edge of our PPC, the limit of what we can actually produce within the economy. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to you. I kind of like the Keynesian view because it combines the long run and the short one into one curve. As you can see, in the short run, we can take on extra people without affecting the price level. And then as we approach full employment, then that's when wages start to rise and we reach the limit of what we can actually do in the economy. So shifts in the Keynesian view, again, we have the same causes of those shifts, and you can see the curve still remains flat, but we shift it outwards to the right or inwards to the left. So again, change in productivity, it's very similar, well, exactly the same as the classical view, change in productivity, change in raw material prices, energy prices, technology, legislation, infrastructure, and education. So what's happening in the news? Oh, we can see here, we've reached the limit of training new drivers. So our capacity to train new drivers will then limit how we can supply goods and services. So if we haven't got enough HGV drivers, which we've seen recently, we've kind of maxed out on that supply. And it will just take time to train more drivers. Nissan announces major UK electrical car expansion. So we've brought in new technology, electric battery plant. So we're going to build a new electric battery plant. So advances in technologies, we're going to increase production. Jaguar Land Rover, a shortage of raw materials. They can't get the computer chips to actually build into their cars. And so they've had to reduce production. And so that would affect the LRAS curve by shifting it out backwards to the left. Building projects affected by raw material prices, so they can't get the supplies and the prices are rising. As we mentioned before, free ports, worth you looking into what free ports are, where there's reduced legislation and reduced taxes, which increase production. And there we go, UK car output slumps the lowest since 1954 due to Brexit and woes in the sector. So, exam tips. Read any question asking about aggregate demand. Usually it will specify, it should say aggregate supply. Usually it would specify using classical Keynesian view. If it doesn't, then it's up to you. You can choose which view you're going to use. You can use both views in the question and provide contrasting analysis of a situation. And in your opinion, you need to provide your opinion. What is the most suitable view, whether it be the classical or the Keynesian view? And remember, label all your diagrams fully. Draw them large enough to read. I'll just change this now. I'll just cross that out. That should say supply. Apologies. Okay. So finally, going back to our objective, hopefully now you understand what aggregate supply is. And you understand the difference between a classical short run and a classical long run. And you also understand the difference between the classical view and the Keynesian view of the aggregate supply curve. Good luck with everything. Bye now.